Hajime, welcome back to Comic-Jutsu. JT here with you once again. Today we're going to do a special episode, which hopefully you will find fun. I know because I'm excited to talk to you about this because it gives me a chance to talk a little bit about MMA history and one of its pioneers, and that is the one, the only, the smashing machine, Mark Kerr. So let's take a look. The trailer was recently released. The film, The Smashing Machine from A24. I have really high hopes for this film. I pretty much love everything that comes out from A24. I think it's the best studio going today. They allow filmmakers to tell really personal stories. But anyway, Mark Kerr. I'm going to go ahead and let it play. Hopefully this video won't get flagged. I've got to say off the bat, The Rock looks exactly like Mark Kerr. I wonder if he actually let his hair grow back out a little bit and they touched it up a little bit or something, because his hair looks exactly like Mark Kerr. So this was all happening like in 95, 96, 97. That's the 96, if you will. Myself, I was heavily involved in training jiu-jitsu 4 days a week at the dojo, doing tournaments, the whole spiel. And MMA was really in its infancy at the time. It was no holds barred. It was a different rule set, and it was a different sport before they really, really watered it down to turn it into a sport. But that's neither here nor there. Mark Kerr exploded on the scene. I think it was UFC 14. From about UFC number, 4 and on, from the appearance of Dan Severn. Once Dan Severn showed up in those early UFC events, you could see the dominance of the large wrestler against everyone else. Being trapped inside of a cage really benefited the wrestler, because it makes it harder for people to move and get away. They can be pinned up against the cage, and especially during those days, for a while they could even hold the fence. A lot of the rules that eventually formed the rule set of MMA as they moved on towards legalization were developed because of stuff that people were doing in the ring. Like Tank Abbott tried to throw a guy out of the cage at one point, so they made that illegal. They made it illegal to grab the cage. A lot of the fights in Japan, they would grab the ropes, and it took them a while before they made that illegal. So Mark Kerr shows up in UFC 14. Gigantic guy. He's got muscles upon muscles. Allegedly steroid. He would show you. There was a documentary about, I think it was even called The Smashing Machine back in the day, where they filmed a lot of his life, a lot of his behind-the-scenes preparation for the major PRIDE Grand Prix that were going on at the time. So PRIDE was in a lot of ways, like the cousin or brother organization of the Ultimate Fighting Championship at the time. And because they were paying so well, fighters could go to Japan and just earn a ton of money. They could earn more money in Japan than they were getting in the United States. But there were also several other things that were going on. There was no sort of drug testing. They were allegedly handing out steroids to everyone that wanted it. I think there's even a section in one of the in Kerr's documentary where he's like literally asking them about steroids. Maybe it's just painkillers, because that sequence is actually in this trailer. Now I'm giving you all the backstory to it, but he was an unstoppable machine. He basically blew through his one UFC appearance. He stopped a guy with one knee, and I think he just threw another guy down and just headbutted him or whatever. Maybe he choked him from behind. It's been a while since I watched it, because they were horrible fights in terms that because he just came out and just dominated. He completely dominated. And you're looking at this as a skill fighter, is what you might consider like a jiu-jitsu guy or a, kickboxer, where there's different skills. Not to say that wrestling is not skills, but because there is a lot of skill in wrestling, variety of wrestling styles. I understand all of that. But also, those guys were physical specimens, from Dan Severn, we went to Mark Kerr. Mark Kerr, who was obviously, not Mark Kerr, but Mark Coleman, brother to, fighting brother to the great Mark Kerr. just gigantic guys, just jacked, yoked to the gills. Obviously, heavily abusing steroids, which they're all paying for now, because once you stop that cycle, you kind of fall, your body falls apart, and you eventually do have to stop it. So, they burn the candle at every end, and eventually it catches up to you. So Kerr was basically unstoppable. He went to Japan, started fighting in Pride. The Pride events were one-off fights. They would come in, make, 100 grand, 200 grand, whatever. And then they organized the big Grand Prix. I'm trying to remember how many Pride events it was into it, maybe 7 or 8 Pride events into it, where they brought together all the best heavyweights in the world and had them fight. Up to this point, Mark Kerr was unbeaten. He was unstoppable. He was a real pioneer. He fought in those no hold barred era. He was in. He started in Brazil. He went all the way to Brazil to fight in those crazy fights where headbutts were allowed, elbows, pretty much everything. I mean, they even had instances during fights where one fighter was grabbing another fighter's junk, inside their cup. I mean, these were real, like street fights. These were brutal events. They were doing everything but ripping a guy's nuts off and pulling his eyes out. I mean, and Mark Kerr went through and destroyed people. That was how he got the nickname, the Smashing Machine, because he smashed everyone in those Brazilian tournaments. He did those. They were called Vale Tudo at the time, which means anything goes. And he went through and just destroyed people. Headbutts, elbows, knees, everything. He was killing everybody. Kickboxers, jiu-jitsu-ons, everything. So, years later, blows through the UFC, goes to Japan because it's better money there. This was right before the dark period of MMA and the UFC, where in America you had people like John McCain that was trying to take it, to just make it completely outlawed. It was taken off most of the cable and pay-per-view providers for a period of time, like up until Zuffa bought it. So it was like from UFC maybe 21, 22, all the way up to UFC 30, maybe 33, where it was almost impossible to find. It took Zuffa and Dana White coming in and repackaging the UFC and going to the athletic commissions and saying, hey, how do we legalize all this to turn it into the MMA that we have today, where you have this wide range of rules that are made to kind of water the whole thing down and make it a bit more palatable. But, plus the use of gloves and all that. Though they did have gloves in Pride. So anyway, so back to Pride. So a lot of this behind the scenes stuff is actually you see in the documentary, The Smashing Machine. So I actually don't recommend that you go out and see the documentary yet. Let's watch the movie first, and then if you're intrigued by Mark Kerr's story, go back and check out the documentary, because I'm seeing sequences in this trailer that are straight from the documentary. I've got to give The Rock props for just the way he's presented in this, because he looks great. He looks just like Mark Kerr. He sounds like Mark Kerr. Had this really soft-spoken, unassuming voice, but he was just this huge hulking presence. I mean, he was like, Lou Ferrigno, the Incredible Hulk, just come to life on your screen. See, there's a sequence where he's getting kneed in the head. That's a fight with Igor Vovchanchyn from the Grand Prix. That was his first loss. Vovchanchyn, another destroyer of the no holds barred era. I mean, he was the original Russian fighting machine. I mean, that guy was fighting in tournaments from Brazil to Japan to Central America to everywhere across the world, destroying people. And when he ran into Mark Kerr, it was the unstoppable force versus the immovable object, and the unstoppable force won. I mean, Vovchanchyn crushed him. And then they had the rematch. So when you see Kerr with the bald head, that was, I do believe, when he had the rematch, he had like shaved his head and he was all refocused and everything. So there's Boss Rutan, legendary fighter, and Kerr's trainer. He had him on the right training programs. He was showing him the right things to do, how to integrate all of his skills. And that looks like Alexander Usyk right before that. Not the American guy, but the Russian guy before that. It looks like Usyk might be playing Vovchanchyn in this. There's Usyk right there on the far right. Vovchanchyn, another just humble guy. What you find out from these guys that are really tough guys that have had these brutal fights that go around, just imposing themselves on people inside cages, inside rings. That they don't act like badasses outside the ring. They're usually controlled, very sensible, and in some ways compassionate. And Mark Kerr always seemed like a really good guy outside the cage. You could see from the documentaries, and you see his girlfriend pop up a lot in this trailer. There was a lot of drama. You didn't see like necessarily like fights on the documentary, but they had arguments. You could tell there were things going on behind the scenes, and plus she was involved in like the whole drug thing going on with him. I'll say allegedly, because I don't know, the exact status of all this stuff, but she was enabling a lot of his drug use. But the guy got caught in that rough cycle of one, he was on steroids, and from my understanding, you could tell I've never been on steroids, which has always been my problem because I've fought plenty of guys on them. But once you start that cycle, you have to stay on it. Eventually, your body starts to go in directions where you have to change, where things start to fall apart, or your heart is damaged, or this or that. Maybe steroids have advanced nowadays. Of course, they have legal steroids now with TRT and whatnot. That's regulated by one's doctor. But he got caught in that vicious cycle, then having injuries as a fighter and his career as a wrestler leading into it before that. So he was taking just excessive amounts of painkillers. It's not dissimilar to like the cycle of the professional wrestler who's taking uppers so he can get up in the morning to go have his match, and then at night he's getting stoned and drunk, and so he can finally rest and go to sleep. And in between, they're munching on fistfuls of painkillers just to get through the day. And up until the point where Mark Kerr lost to Igor Vovchanchyn, he was the baddest dude in the world. I mean, he looked like he could not be beat. I mean, because he was unregulated, steroid freak. There's what's his name? I wonder who he's playing. The light heavyweight. He's the Bellator double champion, light heavyweight champion, and heavyweight champion. I wonder who he's playing in this in the film. I couldn't tell by the trailer alone. I'll have to look it up on the IMDb, as the kids say. Emily Blunt playing the girlfriend, so the acting is really solid. The Japanese guy actually looks like one of the old Japanese fighters from that Pride era. So until Kerr ran into Vovchanchyn, he was the uncrowned heavyweight champion. At the time, the UFC didn't have, they still had the tournament format. So you came through and you won this tournament. They eventually broke it down to heavyweight and middleweight, and then they sorted it even further into middleweight, lightweight, light heavyweight, heavyweight, and then they started having their champions, But until this point, Mark Kerr was just recognized as just this unstoppable beast. I mean, he was literally the partially crowned but uncrowned heavyweight champion of the world. He could have beaten anyone at that given time, anyone but Igor Vovchanchyn. So very interesting. So I have a lot of high hopes for this. I think it's fascinating. So it should be a good glimpse back into the era of no holds barred fighting before it started to transition into what we see as sanctioned mixed martial arts today. There he is getting kneed in the head. That was Vovchanchyn. Beat the crap out of him. And Vovchanchyn beat him twice. And essentially, Kerr kind of went off the rails after that. He was never the same again. Eventually, he had to quit the steroids. His body completely fell apart. He looked like I do now. And, he didn't have a great ending. He wound up turning into a jobber during his post-steroid phase and lost a lot of fights. But I guess he had bills that he had to try to pay and so on and so forth. But, so there you go. So it should be an interesting look back at that era. Looks like Dwayne Johnson really did his homework. Some of these scenes are straight out of, where he's negotiating with Pride that was allegedly backed by the Yakuza. I mean, that's how crazy things were back then. I keep throwing in alleged, though. We know the truth at this point, just because, I want to avoid any imperial entanglements, so to speak. But should be an interesting look back at that era. And, I have high hopes for it. we need, great fighting sports movies in the vein of, Rocky or some of the other films from recent era. Not so much Red Belt, but that's one that immediately pops to my mind. What was the other one? There was one close to the era of Red Belt. Well, I can't remember at the time. But anyway, so looks great. Looks like it's true to form. Looks like The Rock did his homework. There's the great Boss Rutan again, playing the trainer. He still looks basically the same. He just has more wrinkles nowadays because it's, almost 30 years later, if you can believe that. But should be interesting. So it's interesting that we're getting this little tribute to Mark Kerr. He was an uncrowned champ for a time. But you know what? I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for that because I feel like steroids are a big cheat. So if you're going to be a steroid smashing machine, eventually it's going to come off the rails. But what can you do? That's what I say. I guess I'm bitter from getting thrown around by so many guys on steroids over the years. But anyway, so if you enjoyed my breakdown of this video, be sure to check out my other videos here on Comic-Jutsu. In the Comic Book Dojo, we break down the fighting styles of your favorite superheroes. So if you're curious about what sort of styles that they may have trained, we'll break it down for you, show you what their techniques are from, what they're supposed to do, and how they all fit together. Anyway, I'm JT. This is Comic-Jutsu. Like, subscribe, comment down below, do all those things, come back for more, and maybe we'll do a proper review of the Smashing Machine after it is all said and done. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time. Mate!